Truck drivers, while traveling through the night, what is the creepiest thing you've ever seen? My father was a truck driver in an area of the country known for toxic waste and Superfund sites. He would tell me tales of an oily purple mist or vapor similar to the heat off a road on a hot day, rising off the swamps around the trucking companies at night. A lot of the truckers he worked with would get sick and start vomiting from the vapor. This was back in the 80s and early 90s, before environmentalism really began to make its impact in our area. My dad has been a lifetime truck driver, first a mover, then refrigerated trailers, then freights, where he is now. He has previously stated that he has seen some crazy stuff. Fights, overdoses, etc. So last summer he was driving, somewhere in Virginia. Note that he complained to me and my mom the week before how people in Virginia drive like buttholes. So anyway, he's going down the interstate and sees the flashing lights of a wrecker and a state cop pulled over to assist a broken down truck on the opposite side of the highway. My dad has always been a curious guy, so naturally he slows down 10 miles per hour or so to take a good look at the guy on the other side of the highway and what's going on. Well, then this happens. My dad has always told me if there is a car or any sort of vehicle broken down on the side of the road, get to the farthest lane from them, naturally to give them space to move around their vehicle if they need to inspect it for damage and whatnot. Well, people in Virginia drive like buttholes, so they didn't. Even with a flashing light, the original truck driver who is broken down opens his cab door and begins to climb out of his truck. My dad said he did a little hop off the lowest stair from his truck to the highway. In that instant, this car smashes into the guy, killing him immediately. My dad had to stop and regain his composure because he felt like he would pass out. Now that's across the median and on the other side of the road, so I can only imagine how the wrecker and cop reacted. My dad never likes to talk about it. It brings him to tears thinking about it. He sent a card to the family and offered his condolences, but still to this day, it messes him up more than anything he can recall. The first time I took Highway 90 after a pickup in Del Rio, Texas, heading to another pickup in El Paso the next morning. That is a dark and lonely stretch of road. Was told to look for Martha's lights, but didn't see any and kept trucking. What I did see west of there were these bright lights out in the middle of nowhere. It's pretty sparse out there, so I thought I was coming into a town or something. Nope. As I get closer, I see it's some kind of compound, very well lit with security fences all around and a stubby-looking blimp sitting in there. What the hell? With that much light and fencing, this has to be government. X-Files or some crap going on, I thought. Freaky. Mashed my motor and got the hell out of there. Called a friend of mine the next day that I know has rolled through there before and asked him what he knew about it. Find out it's a border patrol facility, looking for illegals. I guess the unnamed blimp goes up attached to a tether to look for heat signatures or something. My overactive imagination was just going into overdrive, I guess. Stopped listening to Art Bell after that. Tells you how long ago this was. I don't even know what Art Bell is. Was hauling a load from California to Michigan once, and my GPS said the trip would be 2 hours quicker if I took US 50 instead of I-80. I soon learned this was the loneliest road in America. No services or anything at all for hundreds of miles. At 0200 in the morning, I was too tired to keep driving and had to stop on a large shoulder for the night. I was still 200 miles from any services and was thoroughly nervous that night because I've heard stories of truckers getting killed while parked in an isolated area overnight. It was also pitch black and I could hear coyotes while taking a whiz. Luckily, I was undisturbed and continued my trip in the morning. Something else is singing trailers. When I was new to trucking, there was a quiet night while I was in my truck bed and I kept hearing an unusual and consistent creaking sound. Upon inspection, it was the trailer airlines making dull noises. Still can't figure out why they do this and when they do it. Lasts for hours. Another thing, well, I was driving on the I-10 at night and was around Arizona and California. There was a sandstorm at the time, and at the time, the roads would just disappear for like a mile because it was covered in sand. I was lucky because there were a bunch of guys with ATVs driving around and along the road, so I didn't lose my way. Believe it or not, I actually picked this topic because I liked ice road truckers as a kid. Guy I drove with told me a story about killing a hitchhiker. They were in the desert. It was twilight and the guy was wearing tan clothes. He had a girl with him that he said he'd never forget her screaming after he clipped the guy and sent him flying. He knew the guy was dead because he wasn't bleeding, something I didn't understand at first, but Made sense after he told me. When you're dead, your heart stops pumping, so no gushing blood like you might expect. He was a Vietnam War vet, so I figured he has other experiences with this. He even kept driving that night after giving the police report and all the other fallout. He just loved driving that much. I drove third shift long haul for years. Start at 6:00 p.m., run till 8 a.m. Never saw anything close to being called paranormal, but the wrecks I saw daily. Being low light, I'm sure some looked worse when passing, but it's sobering to pass wrecks with multiple ambulances, covered bodies, burnt out cars, multiple fire and police units. Past many a crash in the day. Always seems more dramatic at night. I mean, appropriate lighting kind of does that to any scene, regardless of the context. That's literally the entire art of filmmaking, kind of. And naturally, flashing bright lights in the dark scene of a crash or some kind of tragic incident really does bring home how serious it is. Not me, but my brother saw a pale-skinned little girl with matted blonde hair walking down the side of a desolate Texas road, swinging her arms around like Vince McMahon. Except leaning forward slightly and walking furiously. Oh, I forgot, she was also wearing a dingy old nightgown. Being the guy he is, he started to pull over to offer her help or a ride, but she turned her head, and it wasn't even a little girl at all, but actually a little person, and stared at him, mouth half open, never slowing her pace or turning away until he floored it and never looked back. He called me right after it happened and was clearly shaken. I don't believe in supernatural anything really, and neither has he ever, but something about this girl shook his conviction. I like to think she was sleepwalking and was tired, but it's pretty tough to write off the opinion of a solid guy I've known my whole life. I was moving heavy equipment from job site to job site, and a lot of the time it was me dropping off a dozer, excavator, etc. Late at night. Pulled up to his side, and as my headlight came across the lot, I was leaving the equipment, and I saw a man with a clown mask and camo clothing on top of the long dumpster, digging through it. I stopped and backed up to put the light back on him as he jumped down the backside of the long dumpster. Talk about looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds while I unchained and got the excavator off the trailer, and I was out. Never did see or hear anything, just assumed some creepy clown was watching me from the woods. I get it. That would be terrifying to see a man in camouflage and a clown mask lurking in the darkness. I'd probably be thinking, goddamn, time to get the heck out of here. This sounds like a goddamn Scooby-Doo plotline. I can picture it already. The mystery of the camo clown. It's the business owner. The economy's bad. Biden's America. You meddling kids. Bin Man here. I started around 4:30 a.m., was in a pretty remote area, one house every half mile or so, and I saw this dude standing in boxer shorts and boots on, nothing else, holding what looked like a head of a doll. It looked too small to be human. It was creepy as heck. Thankfully, the bin I had to empty was another half mile down the road. Sounds like the opening of some kind of new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. It didn't happen to me directly, but my uncle was literally abducted while working as a trucker. I'll try to remember the details as best I can. He only told me the story once, then refused to speak about it again. He worked as a trucker his entire adult life, or at least for as long as I was alive. One day, he was up and around Illinois or Indiana area, I think, and it was early evening. He pulled over at a truck stop for a break. He fueled up the truck, then went inside and had dinner. It was one of those with a diner-type place inside. Then took a shower. Point being that he was in there for a little while, 30 to 45 minutes. When he came out to get back in the truck, everything looked normal. But as soon as he opened the door, a guy jumped out from behind the cabin. I think he was hiding between the cabin and the trailer, and pulled a weapon. I think he said it was a gun, but it might have been a knife. Guy orders my uncle to get in the cabin and climb in the back. My uncle drove one of those trucks with the sleeper bed area, the ones you have in the back. Then the guy climbed in after. He told my uncle to lay down on the bed and put his hands behind his back. Then he took some bungee cables my uncle kept in the cabin and tied him up hands and feet. Didn't gag him, as far as I can remember. Then the guy gets in the driver's seat and just starts driving. Uncle said he had no trouble getting the truck going, so he clearly had some experience driving big rigs. From what I remember, he didn't talk to my uncle the whole time. He just drove and would occasionally look back and flash the weapon to remind my uncle that he could mess him up if he wanted. My uncle said he couldn't really see where they were, but he could tell they were on the interstate again. After a long time of driving throughout the night, my uncle mentioned it was probably when the fuel tank was getting low, he pulled over at another truck stop. The guy just looked back at my uncle, seemed to think about something, maybe whether or not to untie him, then just got out, shut the door, and left. My uncle said he laid there for a while, scared he was getting fuel or food or something, then coming back, but he never did. After several more hours, another truck pulled into the spot next to him, and my uncle yelled for help until the guy opened the door and found him. Pretty sure they called the police. My uncle never directly said, but I can't fathom that they wouldn't. But they never found the guy as far as my uncle knew. Turns out that he drove him to the next state over and stopped when he was at 10% of a tank left, and it looks like he left on foot. Sounds like it was fortunate that no one else was fueling at the time, or he might have taken their truck too. After that, I want to say my uncle got like a month off from work to go home and spend time with his family. He actually went back to work as a trucker for a few years more, but he would never do long-haul trips anymore, and he pretty much retired the second he had enough years in. It was scary listening to that story, not only because it's messed up circumstances, but also because my uncle was a pretty tough dude, and you could just see in his eyes that this thing still haunted him. He did seem extremely grateful, though, that the guy didn't actually hurt him. My cousin was 1 year old at the time, and was my uncle's only kid. I guess the moral of the story is, be freaking careful, everyone. There's some messed up people in this world. They are right, the world is not just sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops. There are lots of people who will want to hurt you for any reason all over the place. So my stepfather was a truck driver for 30 years. He stopped driving after a particularly windy night. A guy on a motorcycle was riding too close to the side of his trailer, and I guess the wind blew and he got pulled off his bike under the wheels, and he always told me not to ride my bike next to a truck, because they create whirlwind, and without those side barriers you could get pulled under. He said he saw the bike swerve off into the median, and that's how he knew. He hit the bottle pretty hard after that, and never was quite the same. I have had to reread this several times over because they have refused to use any semblance of punctuation whatsoever in this entire bit of writing, and it is maddening. I'm not exactly what you'd call a truck driver, but my uncle used to have a small fleet, and sometimes he'd pay me to recover a truck when a driver got fired or quit in the middle of a hole. By far the creepiest thing that ever happened to me was when I recovered a truck outside of Detroit. The driver tried to buy crank from an undercover cop and was fired, and my uncle flew me up there to deliver the load and deadhead back to Chicago. Anyway, it's pretty late when I get in, and even later when I get to the truck stop the rig is parked at. So after I called my uncle to let him know I was on site and the cargo was secure, and made sure everything was in working order, I figured I'd catch some sleep and head out first thing in the morning. As soon as I get settled into the rack, I hear this tap, tap, tap on the drive side window. So I unbutt the bunk and slide into the seat, where I found myself face to face with this beat up looking black lady. She goes, "You looking for some company?" Now, I've never had the dubious pleasure of spending some quality time with a lizard before, and I wasn't about to start, but I had dealt with them before, and frequently a "no thanks" doesn't get the point across. So I'm all, "No, get your butt off my truck and leave me alone." She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Honey, I ain't on your truck," and turned to walk away. Sure enough, she hadn't been standing on my truck. She was just like 7 feet tall and wearing platforms. Well, at that point, what are the platforms even for? A few years back, I pulled into an empty rest area up near Cadillac in Michigan, around 3 a.m. It was the middle of February, and there was a few inches of snow on the ground, and I had to trudge a quarter of a mile from the truck lot to a pavilion, which is no fun. On the way back to the truck, I looked to my right and realized I'm not alone. In fact, I'm equidistant from my truck and a bobcat the size of a large dog that's watching me intently. I instantly freeze in my tracks, and it takes a few steps towards me before stopping as well. Now, I have no idea what to do about a bobcat, but I figure he can definitely beat me to the truck, especially given the terrain. I don't even know if they're dangerous to humans, but I've played some Red Dead Redemption in my time, and I'm not happy about the situation. I turn full face to it and start backing toward the truck, all the while waving my arms and bellowing at it, trying to drive it away. It's not very promising because it keeps taking a few steps towards me and stopping. About this time, a pair of headlights flash over the lot and a minivan pulls into the lot, completely oblivious to the National Geographic event taking place. I start yelling as loud as I can and manage to alert the guy driving it that there's a crazy person wandering around. He starts his vehicle up again, preparing for flight, and as he backs out, his lights hit the bobcat and it takes off into the trees again. I make a run for the truck truck, the van drives off into the night, and thus ended probably the fourth most dangerous encounter I've had in Michigan. Why even lie about there being a crazy person wandering around? I'd be like, hey, honk at this goddamn bobcat, run it over if you have to, it's intimidating me. Driving between Illinois and Wisconsin last year around 2 a.m., suddenly my headlights illuminate the highway ahead of me and the road is covered with many large splotches of freshly deposited blood and unrecognizable tatters of flesh. This was like something out of Clive Barker's Nightmares. I can only guess that a semi must have smashed into a deer at highway speeds and just obliterated the poor beast. Yeah, I'm a paramedic and drive through the night. One time I was going through an alleyway at like 4 a.m. looking for someone who overdosed and found two people shooting up on a mattress surrounded by human feces, and the ground was moving because it was all rats scattering at the side of the ambulance lights. This one isn't about truckers, but I just wanted to let you all know that this is the endpoint for people that do hardcore drugs on the regular and don't know how to control themselves. Don't do drugs, kids. Went with my grandpa from Fresno, California to someplace in Death Valley. We were in the middle of nowhere between towns in the California deserts. I wasn't paying much attention to the road at the moment, and suddenly the whole rig swerved hard. I figured it was an animal of some sort, but no. The sewed mirrors showed a woman wearing some sort of long, flowing dress. We were both confused as there were no cars parked anywhere. How she got there and what happened to her, we'll never know. Yes, we did report it to the police. Oh, lady of the desert with your long black flowing skirt, I don't know where you're going, why you're here, or what is worse. My grandfather was a truck driver at a lumber yard for about 25 years after World War II. He once told a story about how he and a co-worker both left at the same time from the yard. My grandfather would often go first, and the others would follow, but the other guy insisted on taking the lead. So they're driving on the highway, full speed, and his co-worker gets cut off by a car that just switched lanes without looking. He slams on the brakes. My grandfather noted this, and being so close behind, tapped the brakes and was able to do an emergency slide into the left lane without slamming into anyone. The car was rear-ended by the truck. My grandfather pulled over and came running back, only to find that the contents of the load, tons of lumber, shifted forward during the hard brake and destroyed the cab, decapitating his friend in the process. While my grandfather was no stranger to such sights in the war, especially as someone who fought on islands in the Pacific, he said this was especially tough on him, since when you're in war, you prepare yourself for this kind of thing. You don't expect something so gruesome in civilian life. Trucker here. Creepiest thing would have to be wind, to be honest. Driving down the road and you can't hear it, and I couldn't feel it in my truck. However, the truck in front of me seemed to lift up and just flip on its side. It seemed like it was out of nowhere. I guess it isn't that creepy, but when you're following and the truck in front of you seems to float up and onto its side, it is a little concerning. The most scared I have ever been was going over Donner Pass one night in late April. I had checked the weather reports and the only concern was supposed to be light snow flurries at the highest elevations. CA will issue mandatory restrictions indicating that you have to put chains on your tires. So I checked the CA.website and no restrictions were called for. I went through the inspection station at Truckee and they were asking if we had chains on the truck, but still no call to put them on. About 10 miles up the road, the sky opened up into the worst whiteout blizzard I have ever been in. I could barely see 50 feet in front of me, and there had been other trucks ahead of me, but I lost sight of his light completely. I could see his tracks in the snow. I slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. Then, just to make it worse, the wind was blowing and the snow was swirling in all directions, and I began to experience a strange vertigo, like I was flying and tumbling in the air. I had to glue my line of sight on those tracks in front of me and hope that guy did not drive off the road. I made it. Only lasted about 30 miles and it turned into heavy rain. I told my dispatcher if I ever had to go through there again at night and any snow was forecast, I was going to shut down until daylight. See, this was the sort of thing I wanted to watch Ice Road Truckers for, but obviously when you get down to it and in the shoes of the person driving, it's like, hell no, I don't want to be in this situation. I never want to be in that situation again. Just a casual trucker here. Can't say I've seen anything that I would consider paranormal, creepy, although when I started, I always thought I would get fortunate enough that some girls would flash me or something. That's never happened. But I have seen like 4 dudes jerking off. Sometimes, my friend, that is simply the way that life goes. We can't expect everything that we want to happen in life, even if it's as mundane and simple as a girl flashing you while you're on the road. And I'm sorry for that. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.